And then for capital appreciation, we're looking at between 5 and 10% in most of the countries we work in. So you would take your realized gain of your cash on cash and your unrealized gain of your capital appreciation, and you put them together. So you can be at, 15, 19% return on these, plus the 50% during the build cycle. And by the way, it's a titled property, so it's completely freehold. There's no leasehold. You have it for the rest of your life.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor! 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 Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex Schloe.
Welcome back to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, where we help physicians learn how real estate investing and entrepreneurship can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Schloe, and today's episode is going to be a little bit different. We're going global. We're talking about how international investing, second residencies, global diversification can create freedom and resilience in a changing world. Our guest today, Mikkel Thorup, is an expert in expat consulting. He helps high net worth clients legally mitigate taxes, obtain second residencies and citizenships, and also how to invest in tangible assets around the world, from international real estate to agricultural land and timber plantations. It is going to be awesome. Mikkel, thank you for coming on the podcast today. How are things going?
Things are very good. Thank you very much for having me, Alex. I'm looking forward to today's conversation. It should be a good one and hopefully inspire and inform your audience. And it should be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it as well. Thanks for calling in all the way from Panama. So excited to learn more about your journey. And, before we get started, do you mind just telling folks a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Canadian, but I've been overseas for 25 years now. I've been traveling very extensively during these 25 years. I've lived in 9 different countries. I've visited about 120, and I've circumnavigated the globe over 400 times. I invest overseas. My family has all been overseas. My wife is from mainland China. As I said, I'm Canadian with Danish heritage. We met in Africa. We met in Germany. We got married in Africa. My first child was born in the UAE, second in Brazil, third in Chile, and fourth in Mexico. So all of our kids are born in different countries, have different citizenships. We own real estate in almost a dozen different countries, my wife and I. And just very, very passionate about these things and very passionate to talk to you today about all of these things.
Absolutely. That is probably the coolest introduction I've ever heard. And before we start talking a little bit more about global investing, what's been the favorite country you've ever visited?
Ooh, that's a really hard one. You're going to start it off on a really hard one, Alex. I don't know. I like all of the really different countries. I like the countries that people don't go to. I like the countries that you hear all these bad things about, and then I want to go and take a look myself and see, if it's true or not true, I mean, one of my favorite countries in the world is Colombia. I first went to Colombia over 20 years ago, and it is just so stunning, beautiful on every level, with the most lovely people you'll ever meet in your life, but, doesn't have the bad reputation because of a man that was there 30, 40 years ago, and, a lot of things he did in Medellin, and, but it's this stigma, but the reality is just so much different. And you'll find this with a lot of countries in the world. There's so many places that have, quote unquote, a bad reputation or something like this. And then you go over there and the people are just amazing. The food is fantastic and the history is super interesting. So I like that kind of stuff.
That is awesome. Yeah, the Schloe family, we love traveling. We just took our kids to Europe for a little over 4 weeks. My brother lives in Germany, and we were able to visit with them and go to a bunch of other countries and cliff dive in Malta. And it was just the best time. My son's 4.5, and our oldest, Jackie's 4.5, and then Owen, our youngest, about 15 months. And people are like, man, you're crazy. What are you doing? I can't believe you're taking kids, to go travel in Europe. And we're like, well, we want to go. So we want to bring them with us. And it was so cool to make those memories and have those experiences. And I completely agree. Colombia is on our short list of places we want to go to. We want to try and travel internationally at least a month or so out of the year. And so Colombia is definitely on our list either this year or next. So I might have to hit you up for some recommendations.
100%.
That's awesome. Well, let's talk about how you got into the world of global investing. How did that come about for you?
So for my story, we have to go pretty far back in time. It's kind of divided into threes, my international life. So the first, call it 7 years, I was just traveling and backpacking and just having fun. I lived in ski resorts for 18 months. I hitchhiked through Central and South America for over a year. I lived in the South Pacific. I was just kind of, being a late teens, early 20-year-old, just traveling around the world, just having fun. Eventually, I got very interested in personal finance, and I got interested in the conversation about money and just started different types of investing. I was doing the stock market. I traded derivatives. I did lots of different things. And I did that for probably about 7 or 8 years. And I made a lot of money, Alex, and I lost a lot of money. And eventually I got sick of losing money in this kind of up and down type of thing. And I went away from, traditional stock market equity type of investing. And I got really into entrepreneurship. And then I was getting big into these types of things. So I kind of took the things that I knew, which was investing and personal finance, and I sandwiched it with what I was very passionate about and am still passionate about, which is living overseas and traveling. And that's when I created our company, Expat Money. And, now our focus is, like, as you said in the intro, the tax and the immigration and the structuring and all of these types of things. But the investment side is really the tangible assets. Okay. I want things that I can touch and smell and feel and taste and put my arms around. I don't like, I have no idea what's on some of these balance sheets for publicly traded companies. You go to look at it, it's all in gibberish. And even though I'm, would be considered a sophisticated investor, I can't make heads or tails of what's going on in these companies. I want something that I can actually understand. And for me, that's always been productive real estate. My parents were real estate investors when I was a child. They did fix and flips. My mother was a real estate agent and a broker when I was growing up. So I had like a huge background in these types of things. And when we moved into real estate, it was like, okay, I can calm down now. I don't have to worry, especially with children. Although the markets can be very exciting, that's not necessarily the best way to do things. When you have young kids around in the house, you need to be focused, and, it's all about providing for the family. So for me, it's very the productive real estate or the productive assets that I put my focus in.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm sure your parents were super pumped to hear about you going into real estate after you also grew up in that real estate environment. And what a cool opportunity for your kids also to get to learn from you and be in that environment as well. Any tips or tricks in regards to being an entrepreneur, being a father? Any tips or tricks in regards to that?
I think the big thing for me is bringing my children into it. So my eldest is 9, our youngest is 5 months. So we've got a big gap in between, the 4 of them there. They're pretty evenly spaced out, but with our 9-year-old, we try to include her in everything. So, we're talking about traveling with kids. We're about to leave for a trip to go to Turkey. We have a second home in Turkey. We're going to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Doha, and then I'm speaking in Prague at a conference, and then to Slovakia, back to Turkey, and home to Panama. We'll be gone for about 3 weeks. And my daughter will see me speak on stage in a couple of different countries. And, we take her to all of the dinners. She meets all of the clients. My mother, who lives with us for, 10 years now, is part of the business. My wife's a stay-at-home mom, but she still participates in the business. So we're constantly talking about these things. So it's the family and the business and the investment is always front and center in everything we do. We don't try to separate, work time and family time or anything like that. It's all blended together, which I think gives a very interesting childhood. And she asks a lot of really intelligent questions, which is really cool because we go for a lot of walks together and we talk about things, and, getting her passionate and interested in these things at, 7, 8, 9 years old. I can just imagine what kind of an entrepreneur she's going to be when she's 25 or 30 or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. She's going to be a force for entrepreneurship. That's amazing. And what a cool opportunity also to travel with you, to be with you, to see you speak on stage, and to interact with all these different cultures and languages. I mean, it's going to make her so well-rounded and so intelligent, and it just able to relate to all these different cultures. It's going to be such an incredible opportunity for her as she gets older and gets started on her entrepreneurial journey.
Well, one of the cool things we actually do, and this will be a concrete example for you, and since you're a father, you'll probably like this one a lot. So last year we went through the Balkans, and I was speaking at a conference. We were going to these VIP dinners and stuff like that. And there's probably 100 people at dinner. And my 9-year-old, well, I guess 8-year-old at that time, was with me. And I said, okay, I've got a secret mission for you. She's like, oh my goodness, what's the mission? And I was like, okay, you need to go and find 3 people, and you need to ask them what their name is, what they do for work, and if they play a musical instrument or any sports or have any hobbies. She's like, okay. So she runs off, and she's gone for like 20 minutes, and she comes back. She's like, I met this Russian woman, and she practices yoga, and she plays guitar, and she sings, and she does online marketing. I was like, I don't know what online marketing is, but it sounds very interesting. It's like, oh, that's amazing. So she leaves again, and then she comes back, and she meets this German guy who plays the drums and likes bodybuilding and things like that. But it was so funny because I'm walking around afterwards and I'm talking to people, and everyone's like, your daughter's amazing. She's like, I felt someone like yanking at my shirt sleeve, and I turned around and there was no one there. And then I looked down and there's this little kid, and she wants to know if I play any musical instruments. And she's like, my daughter just goes out there and talks to grown adults for 20 minutes, for half an hour, completely not shy, no inhibition of these types of things, and just asks all kinds of questions. I mean, you're a doctor. Every time we go to the doctor, I'm like, okay, ask the doctor how long they went to school and why did they become a doctor, and do they enjoy it, and what are the 3 most important things they need to know about being a doctor. And every time we meet different people from around the world, I'm always encouraging her to ask questions. So I think that's cool. I think this is amazing personally.
That is absolutely amazing. Yeah, it's I heard a saying, and it's how to essentially network, and it's instead of trying to be the most interesting person in the room, be the most interested. And your daughter is already learning that as she's going, and she's asking these incredible questions, and she's gaining this wisdom and insight from people from all over the world. I mean, what a really, really cool opportunity. I absolutely love that. Mikkel, what was your personal kind of aha moments that led you to build Expat Money, or was this something that over time kind of built itself?
So good question. So as I said before, I was kind of up and down with a lot of the stock market and things like that. And I wanted to do entrepreneurship, but I tried a few things and I failed. I mean, entrepreneurship is not easy. It was a bit of a trial and error. And I was very into fitness as well. I'm very, like a lot of exercise. I'm a very athletic person, always have been, even since a child. I tried to start a gym. I tried to start a clothing company. I tried to start a supplement. I do all these types of things. But I had, besides an interest in fitness, I didn't really have any competitive advantage of those things. And then I remember just sitting down with a piece of paper and a pen and just kind of listing out all of the things that I was uniquely positioned to help people with. And it was like, okay. At that point, I'd probably been to, I don't know, call it 70 or 80 countries, and I was, very early 30s or late 20s or something like that. And it was like, that's probably pretty unique, 15 years maybe at that time traveling. And I was like, okay, I can talk very intelligently about these things, and something that's very difficult to do, that takes a lot of money, a huge barrier of entry to go to these places. And, we talked quickly about some of the countries I like. But I mean, I've been to North Korea. I've been to Iran. I was in El Salvador 25 years ago. I've drove across Africa multiple times. I spent time in Nigeria, and, I've been to China 20 times, and, all these countries that most people would never have a chance to go to. So, that was something that I had a huge competitive advantage over. So once I kind of put that together with finance and money, which is a massive industry on its own, I was able to carve out a bit of a niche. And there's not many people who do what I do. You can't go to expat school or offshore university or something like that, right? Like my work is, one part lawyer, one part accountant, one part, property developer, one part precious metals dealer, all of these things I need to know and be able to speak about and understand and have contacts in. Well, there's nothing like that. You can't go to school for these things. I mean, I didn't go to university to learn these things. I traveled. I was a guinea pig. I went through it myself. I read thousands of books, literally thousands of books about the topic. And then I mentored under some of the top experts, legal minds and accounting minds in the world. And that's how I built this base of knowledge. But that's not a common path, I would say, for a lot of people. But it worked very well for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a unique path for sure. And I'm excited to dive further into that. So let's talk about global investing, kind of lay the groundwork for global diversification and tax strategy. Again, you're not a tax attorney. So if anyone is wanting to know the nuts and bolts or specifics of this, talk to your tax attorney or talk to an accountant. But for someone like myself who's built wealth primarily in the United States, what are the biggest reasons to look internationally, whether for investing, tax planning, lifestyle freedom? How would you answer that question, Mikkel?
Well, yes, and just to, double click on what you said, I am not a tax lawyer or a CPA. However, I have full-time lawyers that work for me at my company. So, we develop a lot of these strategies, but I have the lawyers sign off on everything that I do. And I work with tax attorneys in the US and Canada and around the world on all of these things. So although I'm not a lawyer myself, I do have lawyers who work for me. We're about a 32-person team here at expatmoney.com. So a pretty fleshed out team. Now, as for your question on, why people might want to look overseas, well, people are doing it for a whole host of different reasons. I mean, part of it is the downside protection. If we look at what happened in Canada during, the trucker convoy, where there were people protesting and the government didn't like it, so they started freezing people's bank accounts, literally just freezing them arbitrarily. Even people who were donating, their bank accounts were frozen. If you don't agree with that, then, maybe having an offshore bank account might be a good idea, right? Having a credit card or a debit card in a foreign country, which your home government can't just arbitrarily turn off, right? I think that's a very good reason for having a second passport. Look at what happened during COVID. They were not issuing new passports. They weren't renewing passports. It was very difficult to travel. In some countries, there was upwards of a 6-month wait on getting another travel document. That's your freedom of movement. That's your ability to travel in and out of countries. That is, I would say, one of your rights, to be able to have a solid freedom of movement. I even had someone putting political stuff aside, I had a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, whose girlfriend accidentally put his passport in the washing machine. It was in his jeans pocket, and she put the jeans in the washing machine, destroyed it. And as I said, there was a 6-month wait, so he couldn't get a new passport. But if you have a second travel document, if you're a dual citizen and you have a second passport, well, while you're waiting for the new one to come in, you can use your secondary passport. So there's all these different ways and reasons that you might want to do it. We follow, a plan B or an economic plan B. So if you don't like the direction, well, you've got money and assets and a second home and, probably some clothes or something like that offshore, or some precious metals offshore that you can use in case you need. This is all insurance. It's a form of insurance to protect your downside. And if you look at, your niche, doctors are probably, well, not even probably, doctors are the most sued profession in the world, along with lawyers, accountants, and nurses. So it's, in most cases, it's not a question of, if you're going to get sued. It's when you're going to get sued and how much you're going to get sued for. So, imagine two scenarios. You have everything in your own name, in your local area, and you get sued. Okay, you've got insurance, great. But a lot of the suits now are going well above the insurance levels, and they can come after everything. By the way, probably the largest groups of my clients are doctors and lawyers. First of all, doctors and lawyers know the value of specialized information. You spent a ton of time going to university and learning what you guys know. And then you bill, obviously, at very high rates. So if I can save someone 1,000 hours of research or going through this, like, you guys are clearly very smart. There's no question about that. You could do what I do, but it might take you 1,000 or 5,000 hours to study it. What do you bill at, right? So if I can stop an expensive mistake or stop you from getting sued, in my example, everything is in your own name in your local area, opposed to someone goes to sue you and you're like, your lawyer goes forward and like, yeah, you can absolutely sue. So, everything is held offshore in a Cook Islands trust. Nothing's in his own name. He has like $53 in his personal bank account, and, come try to bring a suit to Cook Islands. Cause it's, I used to work under a lawyer, and he said, it's not about hide and seek. It's the kids' game, show and tell, right? Show and tell. So it's like, okay, I got a Cook Islands trust, or I have a Panama private interest foundation, or a Liechtenstein family foundation or something like that. And this is all legal, completely compliant, but you can hold things offshore. And then this contingency lawyer is not going to take on the case. There's no way they're going to do these things. It's going to be extremely expensive to go overseas. Often they'll have to put up the dollar amount or say 40% of the dollar amount that they're trying to claim, as a bond before they would bring the suit in these foreign countries. So it's just so different. And, you change these types of environments and you can really protect your downside.
That's an awesome answer. Yeah, really cool to hear. And it makes complete sense that attorneys and physicians are some of your, most common clients. And I, want to footstop the point you made of it's worth it to pay the extra or get in the community to save that time, right? To save that 500 to 1,000 hours at your hourly rate to go to the expert and do that. So that is really helpful. Let's take a step back and talk about, okay, I'm a physician reaching out to you and I just want to learn the basics of what may be beneficial. I have an interest in real estate. How would you approach that person coming to Expat Money and working with you?
Yeah, so I follow what I call the 4+1. So the 4+1 is the immigration side of things, the investment, the structuring, and the tax obligations. Okay, so that's the 4. The +1 is the lifestyle. The lifestyle is what ties everything together. Now, if I'm going to get you a second residency or a second passport, Alex, if I can do it on the back of real estate, then amazing. So I can, help you buy a piece of real estate, and on the back end, I can get you a permanent residency, which is the legal right to live, work, do business in a foreign country. But now the question is, all right, how, what are your tax obligations for this? So, there's the tax obligations back to your home country, maybe the US or Canada or UK or whatever it is, and then the tax obligations of the new country. But we might also want to structure your property offshore. We might want to use an LLC, an IBC, an International Business Corporation, an SA, a Sociedad Anónima, or a trust or a foundation like we were talking about a moment ago. Well, what are your tax obligations to that third country where we have the structure in, right? So, this is your immigration, this is your real estate, this is your taxes, this is your structuring. And then the lifestyle is, well, let's try to pick the piece of real estate in a place that you actually enjoy spending time in. Let's get a lifestyle property or somewhere that you can go and visit it every year. Or, if you need to go and check on it and everything like that, that you're actually going to want to get on an airplane and visit that country. Because there's no point in doing this and putting it in a country that you hate or you don't like the weather. Like, I grew up in southwestern Ontario. I don't like the cold weather at all. I like beaches and sunshine and white fluffy clouds and, blue skies. This is for me, right? So this is kind of where I start, is we're trying to, work through all 4+1 of these types of things. And then we're building it out piece by piece by piece. Make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned second residency or citizenship by investment. What does that really mean, and who's that best suited for?
So there are many different types of immigration plans. I mean, on the far side, you can think of things like a student visa or a temporary visa or a work visa or something like that, okay? That is a set amount of time with set qualifications that you get to have that for, all right? You go to university for 2 years in Spain, all right, you get this visa. You're going to work for that company. You're under contract. The moment you leave, the visa expires, all right? I don't do too much with that. I do another one called permanent residency visa. So a permanent residency visa, the qualifiers are usually to hold that piece of real estate for a certain amount of time and spending a certain amount of time in the country every year. So for example, I live in Panama. We've got a program called the Qualified Investors Visa. My firm and my partners here, we do roughly 50% of the country of Panama's visas for this best visa, the Qualified Investor. So we've done hundreds of these. And even when the government wants to make changes to it, they consult with our office. We actually work with the government of Panama to make sure that things are going forwards and this is what people want. But it's a $300,000 real estate investment. You have to hold the real estate for a minimum of 5 years. If you want to sell the real estate, you can move it into another project, another piece of real estate, but you have a 6-month window to make sure that's done. Then after 5 years, you can sell the real estate. You can do whatever you want. But during that time, you have permanent residency. And for time on ground, you only need to spend 1 day every 2 years to keep it active. So it's a perfect residency in your back pocket. Okay. So This permanent residency, you can have it for the rest of your life. So as long, Alex, as you do those two things, you keep the real estate for 5 years and visit the country one day every 2 years, you're going to have this forever. After 5 years, you can apply for citizenship. So this is through naturalization, spending enough time in the country, having substantial ties there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For example, my application went in at the end of 2024 to become a citizen, probably mid-2026. I'll get my Panamanian citizenship and I'll get another passport. Okay, so that's permanent residency. Then we've got citizenship by investment or citizenship by economic contribution. So this is where you give a donation or you do something meaningful for the company. And in return for that, they're going to make you a citizen. So for example, I'm a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis, which is a small island country in the Eastern Caribbean bloc. And I made a donation to the government of St. Kitts and Nevis for roughly $250,000. And in return, they made me a citizen and I was able to get a second passport. Their passport has visa-free travel around 157 countries. So pretty solid passport, internationally recognized. And I even get to go to countries with that St. Kitts passport that I don't get to go to with my Canadian passport. So for example, I took a group of my investors to Brazil a couple of months ago. And it was funny. I was traveling in business class. So I was first row of business class. I was the first person off the airplane. And we were flying to Manaus in the Amazon, okay, the major city in the Amazon. I was coming in from Panama. And I knew that Canadians needed a visa. So I kind of looked through the internet in advance, went through my passports. I was like, okay, St. Kitts and Nevis doesn't need. So I went up to immigration. I handed it to him. He looked at it. He looked at me, goes, this a real country? I was like, yeah, yeah, bro. It's a real country. So he gets on the internet. This is just a quick story. Gets on the internet and starts typing around and stuff like that. And he's like, this your country? I was like, no, man, that's not my country. Like, da, 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 da. It's like, this it? I was like, yeah, that's the one. That's the one. He's like, okay. So he pulls up, I swear to God, on my life, Alex, pulls up Wikipedia and is looking at the national anthem and the flag and all of these types of things. And he's just like stamping the thing. And he's like, can't be. Never heard of this country, but visa-free travel. And I got into Brazil with that, where everybody else was standing in line for an hour because they had to get a visa in advance. And then they had to pay all this money. And then they had to go through it and scan. And I was the first one through immigration because I had a second passport. So second citizenship or citizenship by investment is a good option that allows you to do a lot of things, like travel to countries you normally wouldn't be able to. Or if you put your passport in the washing machine, like I talked about, now you have another travel document. And I could go on and on and on about stories about why these things are beneficial to investors like us.
Sounds like no shortage of benefits in terms of a global diversification of investments. What are some of the cons, or what are some of the gotchas in terms of investing? I'm sure that's certainly location specific, but what are some things that folks should consider looking into a little bit more closely if they're going to invest international?
So you definitely need to know the laws where you're going to be investing. And more than that, you need to know the laws of your home country and what your tax obligations are, because it can get very, very complicated. You said something earlier about, check with your tax attorney. Yes and no. I mean, you need to check with a tax attorney, but you need to check with one who understands cross-border transactions, because if they don't have experience with these types of things, their answers are either going to be no or it depends. It depends in legalese is code for I don't know the answer and I need to go and look this up, and I'm going to charge you a lot of money to go and try to find out these answers. All right. That's it depends. So instead of working with just a local CPA or local tax lawyer, your best bet is to find someone who specializes in this so that they can give you definitive answers on what is allowed and what is not allowed, and how we file, what our reporting requirements are, what your tax obligations are. And they just have a much different view of the landscape. Here, I'll give you a doctor analogy, okay? You don't go to an oncologist for brain surgery, right? Like, you're not going to go to a dermatologist if something's wrong with your ankle, or you need orthopedic surgeon, or, you have to go to the right specialist for the right thing. It's like that with doctors. It's exactly like that with lawyers. Okay. So, not all lawyers have the same breadth of knowledge. They might be extremely good at criminal law, but know absolutely nothing about asset protection law or real estate law or tax law or something like that. So my recommendation is find the right professional. And that's why everybody that we work with at expatmoney.com are, brain surgeons in our specific, field on these types of things. Make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. Well, you work with clients on foreign real estate. Where are you seeing some of the best opportunities right now in terms of real estate?
So I'm a big fan of Paraguay. I've been visiting Paraguay for several years now. I've had an opportunity to meet the president of Paraguay on a few occasions, and it is just an amazing country with so many things going for it. So it is a small, relatively small country in the heart of South America. They have no coastline. They have major rivers that run through it, but no ocean. They're very friendly with their neighbors, and it is a pro-business, right-leaning government. I've had an opportunity, as I said, to meet the president, Santiago Peña. I met him here in Panama for a private luncheon with a few people from the private sector. Then about a month or two later, I had an opportunity to sit down with him for about half an hour one-on-one in Paraguay, and kind of an off the books type of meeting. But I'll quickly tell you, I was talking to him and I was advising him on immigration and what foreigners are looking for and foreign direct investment and things like that. And he was listening, very intently. And suddenly, Alex, he leans forwards and he touches me on the shoulder and he says, "Mikkel, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about freedom." And I was like, "Yes, Mr. President, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's exactly what I'm talking about." And I just doubled down and started investing so heavily in Paraguay afterwards. I own commercial real estate, I own office space, I own residential, I own raw land. I've just been putting in tons of work and money and energy and effort. We just had a group that we brought to Paraguay of our investors where I actually led a tour there for 8 days, 8 nights. And I think we had around 50 people, 50 investors on the trip. And these are all high net worth or ultra high net worth families who are coming down to take a look. And everybody was just blown away by this country and what they're seeing in the path of progress there and what is happening. So it is a developing country, but it is catching up so fast under Santiago Peña. The guy's 47 years old, really good head on his shoulders, taking away all the friction and the barriers to investing. And it's like, wow. This is amazing. I actually even started a newsletter called Paraguay Potential, paraguaypotential.com, just because I'm so passionate about talking about this country and what's going on there.
That's amazing. I have to admit, I don't know a whole lot about the country, but definitely going to look into it. That's really cool. Are there any other countries that are top of mind right now from a real estate perspective or an investing perspective for you?
Yeah, I do a lot here in Panama, where I'm located. Panama's a dollarized economy. We've got the Caribbean, the Atlantic. We've got the Pacific. We've got mountains. It's organic food. It's a very safe country. Phenomenal medical facilities here. Very international, group of expats, not just from U.S. and Canada or Europe, but also from the rest of South America. You think when Venezuela went socialist and Peru and Bolivia and, all the productive members of society, they moved to a country, that respects property ownership and things like this. So, we've done a lot here in Panama. I'm constantly having clients visit me, like usually 3-4 times a week. I'm having dinner with clients here in Panama because they're in and out of the country. So we really like Panama a lot. We mentioned Colombia before. I have a lot of projects in Colombia, specifically in Medellin, which is my favorite place in Colombia. We also own some timberland on the far east side. We have about 6,000 acres of timberland out there. And I think that's a very good option too. A lot of the stuff in Colombia is because of this perception versus reality. We're very invested in the northeast of Brazil. I think that there's some really interesting things happening in Brazil about, I've got a lot of Brazilian staff. I love Brazilian culture and music and food. My second child, as I said, was born in Brazil, so I'm a big fan of that. We do a bit in Costa Rica, lots of countries, a lot in Latin America. I will tell you that. We're not finding the freedom in France or in Sweden or something like that. Those places that have, potentially 80% taxes. We like the low tax countries or the zero tax countries. That's a lot more interesting for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure. Well, you mentioned timberland. So what are your thoughts on tangible investments like timber, agricultural land? How do those fit into the portfolio for you?
So I think it's very difficult to get into these types of things in North America. The price of the land is very, very expensive. In Latin America, you can still pick up large portions of land for very affordable prices. Now, the interesting thing is that in some of the regions you're going to invest, they don't have, a long-term mindset. A lot of it is very short-term. So if you can come in, very educated, if you can have a long-term mindset and see things that go well in other places and then kind of transplant those ideas and work with the local communities, then you can do some really, really spectacular things. And that's usually what we're doing. I work with a family office in Medellin, Colombia, and, they've got European background and, we're bringing in some really, really smart minds. But the price of land is so cheap in Colombia that you can just do these amazing deals that you would never be able to do in the US or you were able to do in the US, but 100 years ago, right? So we can kind of look back through history and it's like, all right, what worked in Western countries? And now how do we take those ideas and move them offshore where the cost of labor is a lot less, where the cost of land is a lot less, and then scale it up with modern technology and modern ideas. And I'm a big fan of timberland. I like agricultural types of things. I like productive real estate, opposed to, ragging on the stock market. Is like, all right, so you have a P ratio of like 8,000 and you have no idea, this company's never made money before. You have no idea what's going on. And you're just supposed to hold it and then, one day sell it, which is, okay, great, capital gains, but now you have a capital gains tax opposed to productive real estate, which generates income and you can live off of and, put a roof over your head and feed your kids and stuff. That for me is a lot more interesting. Now I know there's dividend portfolios and stuff, but those are usually 2% or 3%. I'm talking double digits in cash on cash return plus capital appreciation.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. A lot of benefit. And then adding on the specific, country benefits as well and path of progress, as you mentioned, certainly can make that investment even more exciting. And, I just keep thinking about how cool it would be to own somewhere abroad and be like, yeah, I get to go visit and hang out in Panama and stay in my house that I own. Just really, really cool opportunity. Well, how can someone evaluate the stability or the safety of investing in another country? Or if someone's listening to this and like, wow, the world's big, how am I going to start narrowing this down?
Well, you definitely need to do your research. And I highly encourage people to visit the places on their own as well. That's why we do quarterly investors tours. This year, we've already been to Paraguay twice. We did Brazil. We did 4 or 5 trips to Panama. And now at the end of the year, we're going to Colombia with a group of people. I choose these countries because this is where I see the biggest opportunity. And every year we try to go to new countries and we're checking out new things. And the cool thing is, Alex, that, I have, my research team, we've got a PhD political scientist expert, who's, looking into all of these things. I'm very well connected with a lot of the local administrations and I know a lot of the ministers and, Minister of Tourism came and spoke to us in Brazil when we were there. So we're getting a lot of connection directly from the government. We meet a lot of the private sector. We have the research, but it's really cool because I'll go to a country, I'll start investing there. I'll be the guinea pig. And if I like it, I bring the clients. And now I've got 50 other smart, sophisticated investors who are asking developers and bankers and politicians and stuff, a whole multitude of questions. And it's like, here's what I see. Here's what Mikkel Thorup sees. All right. Now, what do you guys see? All right. Do you see the same thing that I see? Do you see the same path of progress? Is this interesting to you? As a community, we're actually a lot stronger because it's not just reliant on one person. I'm not the bottleneck in any of these things. And because we've got all these memberships and we do all these special reports, we're constantly updating them and, modifying, and we're following all the local politics and geopolitics and, all the changes in the laws. And, we read all the laws that we're talking about. We read the Constitution. I've read the Constitution of most of the countries, so when I tell you, okay, Panama's a territorial tax country, well, am I just repeating something else? No, it's at the constitutional level. I've already read the laws. I actually know how this works. I've already gone through it. I've sat down with the lawyers. I've sat down with the government officials and looked at the taxes and how, where it applies and where it doesn't apply. We're the originators of a lot of these ideas. Sometimes you see stuff online and it's like, people have never done this themselves. They've never worked with, side by side with clients. They've never actually been to these places, but like we're in the thick of it. We're on the front lines of all of this. So to answer your original question, I mean, would be to join a like-minded community and work with people who know, and then, get a bit of boots on the ground experience. I think that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah, and I think another question that comes up and probably comes up quite often is financing and what that looks like in other countries. And I'm sure each country has its own flavor, and it's probably not the 30-year fixed mortgage like we have here in the States. What does that look like if you could give a brief overview of what financing a real estate property, for example, may look like in another country?
So here's an interesting one. We do almost zero financing. Now, it is possible to do financing, but I don't really agree with it because remember we were talking about protecting our downside. If you look at 2008, 2009, what happened? People went underwater on those properties. So they ended up owing more than the property was worth. This is when they mailed back the keys. Okay. I don't want a situation like this at all. So what we're doing is we're being very strategic. So for example, in the northeast of Brazil, you can get, or, I have gotten beachfront property. And I mean front row on the beach, not, squint in the distance from the third floor and you might see the ocean. I mean, front row on the beach, lot plus home, brand new build, rental ready for around 100,000 US. So you don't need to finance. Most people will not need to finance something like this, right? And because we do pre-construction, actually what we're doing is we're putting a small deposit down and then we have milestones. So let's say it's 20% down. So in this example, call it 20 grand, right? And then they do the permitting, they prepare the land, and they put the foundation in. Okay, foundation in, another 10% or another 20%, something like that. So, it's 20 grand in and then maybe another 10 grand 6 months after that. All right. Now walls go up, roof goes up, they seal the place, they close it in, another 10%. So you might be in 30, 40% in. And then a couple of weeks before keys delivery, that's when you pay off the balance. But during that time, you've probably, the price of the property has gone up by, anywhere from 30 to 50%, but you've only been in for 30 or 40%. So really, what have you done? You've doubled your money within 2 years at fair market value for the property. Now, some people just trade the paper. So before titling, they'll resell it at a profit. Other people hold it. They'll go through the titling process and then they'll cash flow on it. Like I'm a big fan of holding properties for long periods of time. Or sometimes people will buy multiple properties, put down as little as possible, then sell a few of the units, use that cash to pay off the first ones. And so now you have a couple of properties free and clear that you basically got at a discounted rate. And what we're seeing with a lot of these is, if I'm going to talk in general terms, this is not individual investment advice and nothing in life is guaranteed. All investment contains risk, including the risk of, loss of your principal, blah, 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 is cash on cash return for long-term rentals. You're probably looking at about 6 to 9%. And then short-term rentals, you're probably looking at around 9 to 12% in year one. So that's just the cash on cash. And then for capital appreciation, we're looking at between 5 and 10% in most of the countries we work in. So you would take your realized gain of your cash on cash and your unrealized gain of your capital appreciation, and you put them together. So you can be at, 15, 19% return on these, plus the 50% during the build cycle. And by the way, it's a titled property, so it's completely freehold. There's no leasehold. You have it for the rest of your life. Property taxes are very, very low. And by the way, we were able to get you a permanent residency on the back end to have a plan B. And oh, by the way, it's a beautiful place to go on vacation and, talk to your local accountant, but should be a good tax write-off if you need to go and visit the property every year to go do maintenance or check on it or something like that. There can be deductions for going and taking a look at it. So, all of these things build on one another piece by piece by piece. And I mean, I look at a lot of investments, Alex. I don't see a lot of things like that, in Toronto or Vancouver or, places in the States as well. So.
Yeah, what a cool opportunity for sure. And a great value stack in terms of investment and return. That's not just the tangible, kind of cash on cash return. It's some of these other things that we don't think about as much that's really important. That is awesome. Well, Mikkel, a lot of physicians who are listening to this, they value freedom. They value freedom from burnout, from bureaucracy, from financial stressors. How do you feel like international strategies fit into that pursuit of freedom? I know we've We've kind of already hit on some of those things, but is there anything else in terms of the freedom equation that you feel like we may be missing?
So, Alex, I've been traveling for 25 years straight. As I said, I've been to roughly 120 countries. I've done some amazing things in my life. I've looked at many different countries and religions and histories and cultures. I try to see the world from many different people's points of view. My family, we speak 4 languages in the house at all times. My kids are native level in English, native level in Spanish, native level in Mandarin Chinese, and speak Brazilian Portuguese as well. Very, 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 very international family. I am freedom on all levels at all fronts. This is the most important thing to me. There is nothing, Alex, nothing that compares that I have ever seen in my 25 years that will move the ball downfield for freedom as much as going offshore. I mean, this is the practical side of libertarianism. Everybody is always asking, the theoretical side is why we should pay less taxes or why we should deregulate or why all of these things. But this is the practical side of it. It's like, how do you pay less taxes? How do you protect your downside? How do you, travel and live life on your own term, and freedom of movement and freedom of speech and negative freedoms, freedom from coercion, things like this. This is it. This is the practical side of it. This is how you actually do it. And that's what I've dedicated my life to.
That is awesome. What a great answer. I feel like a lot of people who are listening to this are intrigued, but maybe intimidated by the process. What's the first step to explore this responsibly?
So I will do a plug for our newsletters. I think that we have a very solid newsletter and a couple of smaller sister newsletters. If you go to expatmoney.com, you can sign up. We've got about 5 different newsletters depending on what your interests are. We've got EMS Pulse, which is our daily correspondence where we're writing. We have the Expat Sunday Times, which covers all of the news and the new laws and the new things that are coming out. We've got Paraguay Potential, paraguaypotential.com, talking about Paraguay. We've got Brazil Beachfront, talking about all of the things that are going on in Brazil. And we just launched a new one called Off-Grid Plan B, which is about off-grid communities, about solar, about mature, we've got projects where we've got mature fruit trees and, water independence, and how do we, protect our downside from kind of systemic type of things or problems with the food supply. So, depending on what you're interested in, we've got a lot of free content on our website at expatmoney.com. And I'd love to invite, your physicians and anybody listening today to go and sign up. I mean, you'll be in very good company. There's a lot of really cool people in the community, and we put a lot of work into these newsletters, and they're a lot of fun too. They're not boring, stuffy newsletters. If you got anything from today's conversation, I mean, nothing is very boring or there's a lot of stories. It's really interesting stuff. And if you're interested in freedom, then this is the practical side of it.
Absolutely. We'll be sure to include those links in the show notes as well. And I've read some of your newsletters, and I can agree. They're not stuffy, they're not boring, they're really insightful. I learned a good bit about Paraguay, and that was exciting, and I'm looking forward to exploring some of your resources more. As we kind of wrap things up here, what are 2 to 3 practical steps? Obviously, getting the resources, going to expatmoney.com. What are 2 or 3 practical steps that maybe a US-based physician could take in the next 12 months to begin diversifying globally?
So I would say everybody needs to have 3 major things. These would be the foundational pieces of an offshore plan, okay? The foundational side doesn't mean this is where it stops. This is just where it starts. So number 1 would be a permanent residency or a second citizenship in a foreign country, okay? This is the immigration piece. So you want to have somewhere that you can go to in case, things get bad or you need to travel or you lose that travel document, everything we talked about. So, the immigration. Number 2 would be a second home. I encourage you to get, a property overseas. Short-term rentals work really well. So while you're not using it, you can rent it out, cash flow a little bit. If you can get a lock-off closet or a lock-off room or something down in the parking garage, with a storage unit or something like that, you can put in a couple suitcases with a change of clothes and some personal effects and things like that to make it your own. And then if something happens, then you can go to it while you're not using the property. You can rent it out. You can get some cash. And then the third thing would be some finances or some money or some gold or something offshore, some access to capital. For example, at expatmoney.com/gold, we talk all about precious metals held offshore. And if we look at the performance of precious metals over the last year, call it year and a half has been extremely good. And these types of ways, you can actually get access to capital overseas. So we even have a way that we work with a fully allocated, fully segregated, fully insured depository in the Caribbean. And let's say you put in, $100,000. If you need access to cash, you can take a loan against your precious metals, which is not a taxable event. So you don't have to sell your metals. And they have an LTV, a loan to value ratio of 70%. So if something happened, there was an emergency or you needed access to capital, within a day or 2 or 3, you're going to get access to that capital. They can send it anywhere in the world. So I think if you put those 3 things together over the next 12 months, you're going to be drastically better off than your peers and a lot more protected. So a second residency, a second home, and access to capital overseas, for example, offshore banking or precious metals or things like that. That would be the starting place. And then we would build and grow and add to it from there.
That's amazing. I feel like that is a great place to wrap things up. Mikkel, this has been eye-opening. Is there a place where folks can reach out to you, connect with you if they want to know more? You mentioned expatmoney.com. Is there anything else you'd like to plug or anywhere else that folks can reach out to you?
Well, I think expatmoney.com is definitely the best place. We also have our podcast. We've been going for almost 10 years, hundreds upon hundreds of episodes. We have a new episode airs every Wednesday. I think yours is also every Wednesday. So wherever you guys are listening to us today, there should be a brand new episode of the Expat Money Show on there. So just search that. But yeah, amazing conversation. I really appreciate your time and having me on and a fantastic program. So keep up the good work. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate it. I'm excited to go to expatmoney.com and dive down the rabbit hole. So luckily, I don't have any meetings for a little bit coming up. So looking forward to learning more and reaching out to you. I appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone, for listening. With that, it is Mikkel and Alex with another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast, signing off. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews, and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial or medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.